Hey, how's it going, everyone? Seafood Dax here. Today's video, this is going to be very exciting. It's going to be on the history of Bilbos, transitional rapiers, and Spadroons, considered by many sword masters to be the greatest swords of Europe. Okay? Now, before I could talk about these style swords, I have to talk a little bit about what came before, and that is the rapier. Okay? The rapier had a much more complicated handguard and was much longer than this, okay? Sometimes used with a paring dagger and sometimes used with a cloak as a shield. Now, I have to mention this individual right here, okay? Camilo Agrippa, okay? This book came out in the mid-1500s and it was very revolutionary for its time for several reasons. Now, I'm not saying he's the first one to do this, but he's widely known as at least one of the first to advocate for using the sword in front of you, right? And blocking and attacking with that sword in front of you, as opposed to having it behind you, which you would use either a shield, a buckler, or even another sword to block and then riposte. He's also really well known for adding a lot of geometry into fencing. And is essentially from Agrippa that we get two schools of thought, okay? And that is one of them, the Spanish fencing, which is very circular and triangular, and the French style fencing, which was a lot more linear and a lot more thrust-centric, which is what we see now in Olympic sport fencing. And going back to the Spanish school first, around the mid-1500s is also when Spain began to colonize the islands of the Philippines. And what they brought with them was not the rapier, which was much longer and would have been very cumbersome to carry on a ship, but it was what was called a Bilbo sword, which was had a bigger hand protection, much wider blade, okay, but still about this length, maybe a little shorter. Some of them were a lot wider than this. Some of them were maybe just a little bit more wider than this, and this was a lot more manageable to carry around on ship. And I've talked to a lot of Spanish sword collectors who say that most likely this is what the Spanish brought to the Philippines and taught the Filipinos on, which later became Spanish fencing. And for someone, or Filipino martial arts, right? A Filipino eskrima. And for someone like myself, and I know a lot of you out there getting into this of both HEMA and Filipino martial arts, I find this very fascinating. Now, it should be noted that eventually the naval swords, which I, as I mentioned before, were called Bilbos, eventually got thinner and became something more along the lines of this. But it is not called a Spadroon, it is called a saber, and I'm going to get to that at the end of this video, okay, because there's some confusion there, and I'll clear that up at the end of this video. Now, going to the French school, around the early 1600s, the French also started decreasing the size of the rapiers, and they had something a lot more similar to this, which they called or what we call now a transitional rapier. And the first manual or treatise that we see was by Charles Besnard. Charles Besnard's book was also pretty revolutionary in that he brought about this parry, right, which you call cart over the arm. In Epee and modern fencing, you call it sixth. And in Wing Chun, with the butterfly swords, and even empty hand, you can you refer to this as tansa. Okay. Now, the British were not as fond of the rapier. Okay, they were more into the broadsword. But with the broadsword, it also went through a similar transformation in that it started getting lighter, started getting a little shorter, and a lot of British fencing masters were very fond of this weapon, same way as the French were very fond of the transitional rapiers, also known as the Epee soldats. Now, the British used the term Spadroon, okay, which is, I mostly use the term Spadroon as well. I just love the word, but a lot of fencing masters from Britain, including Donald Mcbane, Lonergan, Roworth, considered the Spadroon to be pretty much the master of all swords, if you will. And the reason being is that you can cut with this, you can thrust with this, but it is also extremely light and fast, right? Your feints with this are extremely quick, right? And it can also defend against weapons such as broadswords or sabers. So it's light enough that you're going to be faster than everyone, but it's robust enough, and it's just big enough of a blade that you can successfully defend against other weapons as well. Now, fast forward in time, and Spadroons were actually brought to the Americas. Okay, the famous liberator Simón Bolívar, his sword was a Spadroon, and he's the one who led Colombia, Venezuela, Bolivia, that whole region into the independence against Spain. And also it found its way into North America, and most popularly known as the NCO sword, was used in the Civil War by the Union against the Confederates to help free the slaves. So for so many reasons, I really love this weapon, okay? It really speaks to me. I love just how fast it is, how light it is, and I really think more people should check it out. There's just so many possibilities with this weapon. Now, real quick, there is some confusion because whereas in English we call these swords transitional rapiers or spadroons, the Spanish refer to them as soldads, basically sabers, okay? And the French as well either refer to them either by épée soldat or by sabers. And the reason being is that the French and the Spanish refer to the sword by their hilts, okay? Not by their blade. Whereas in English, or for the Brits, right, a saber is a curved weapon. This is actually a ganunting, which you hold this way, but I'm using it for demonstration purposes. A saber is a curved blade, back, okay? Whereas the modern fencing saber is completely straight, much like a spadroon. So there is a little bit of confusion in there, but if you could see, they're essentially the exact same weapon, okay? So there you go, guys. If you like the video, go ahead, press like, press subscribe, and I'll see you next time.